So this afternoon's first talk is from Lizzie Henderson and Steph Bryant. They're both graduates in natural sciences from Cambridge University. Steph focusing on ecology, conservation science, evolutionary biology and physiology. And Lizzie on evolution and behavioral biology, geology and the history and philosophy of science. They've both come to Faraday via different routes. Steph has done work in conservation and ecology in Bulgaria and Canada, and then ran the God and the Big Bang project, which was based at the Diocese of Manchester, which was a series of schools conferences that was very successful over the last few years. Lizzie came straight to Faraday Institute via a short internship with Christians in Science, which I hope you've heard of. If you haven't, I'm sure we have leaflets for you on the table, and has been running our youth and schools work ever since. Lizzie is also the coordinator of our children's media project, which is producing materials for children aged 2 to 12, no mean task. So the pair of them are now going to tell us about science and religion with children and young people.
Thank you. It's all right, it's me first. We're going to tag team a little bit so you don't get too bored. So my name's Lizzie Henderson, if you need to tell us apart. We do often travel together, and so we know people who know us as Lizzie and Steph, or Steph and Lizzie, but are never quite sure which one is which. So I'm the blonde one, if that helps you at all. We are going to share a little bit about sharing science and religion with children and with young people. We do a lot of this in schools. We've spoken to some of you already. You've seen some of the materials that we use in schools. We also work with churches directly, but we're aware that a lot of you as church leaders and as people involved with churches either will have direct links with schools yourselves, you'll go in and run assemblies or that kind of thing, or you have teachers in your congregations, you almost certainly have parents and grandparents in your congregations, and so you all have links with children and young people in a variety of ways. And we hope to explore a little bit today of why it's important to be thinking about discussing these topics with children and young people, and how you can be doing that yourselves and encouraging that with the people that you know. So the first things to do is to find out a little bit of what you think. This is an activity that we use a lot in schools and with children and young people at the beginning of sessions to begin introducing some of the topics we're going to be looking at, and also find out a little bit of sort of the feeling in the room about these topics, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, is very useful. So ordinarily we would get them all standing up and running around the classroom to tell us what they think about this, but I'm going to be kind to you because you've just had lunch and you want to sit down. But I will ask for some hands up, and I will ask that you all engage with this, and I'll make it a little bit easier for you. I'm not going to ask for any of your own opinions. I would like you to think yourself into the mind of a child or young person. Think anywhere kind of between the ages of 3 and 18. Pick your favourite age in there. Think back to when you were that old, or think of children, grandchildren, etc. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some statements up on the board here, and I would like to know how much you agree or disagree with those statements. So how your inner child or young person thinks about these statements. And I'll ask who's kind of mostly agreeing with this, who's mostly disagreeing, and who's somewhere in the middle. Are we all on board? Yeah. Excellent, all ready to play, I like it. So the first statement, science can or will be able to explain everything. Science can or will be able to explain everything. Who mostly agrees with that? Yeah, quite a few. Who mostly disagrees? Oh, we've got a group of troublemakers at the back, I can tell already. And who's kind of in the middle? Who's really not sure? Ruth, thank you. Okay, how about this one? Now that we have science, we don't need religion anymore. Now that we have science, we don't need religion anymore. Who mostly agrees with that? Yeah, a few of you. Who mostly disagrees? We've got some vested interest here. And who's not sure? Who's kind of in the middle on that one? Okay, thank you. How about this? Science and religion give different answers to the same questions. Science and religion give different answers to the same questions. Who mostly agrees with that one? And who mostly disagrees? And who's in the middle? Okay, interesting. There's a lot of very thoughtful faces going on here. I like that. How about this? Science can prove that God does or does not exist. So science can prove whether or not God exists. If you mostly agree with that, where's those hands? Who mostly agrees? Ah, a few, not many there. Who mostly disagrees? And who's in the middle on this one? Who's been in the middle on all of them so far? Have I got? Yeah, a couple of you. What about this final one? Most scientists are atheists. Most scientists are atheists. So who's mostly agreeing with that? Your inner child or young person? And who mostly disagrees? And who's really not sure? Okay, that's really interesting, because thank you for your responses. I'm sure that's got you thinking a little bit more about the topics that we're looking at today, but hopefully it's got you thinking a bit about how our children and young people might think about these. Now, we were quite split on most of those, which is also what we find in schools and with young people. You get quite a split. The really fun thing is you often get people who decide they're going to disagree with everything you say instantly before they've heard anything. So they'll sort of zoom over to the side of the room that is disagree. And then as you put the different statements up, they suddenly find they have to move, even though they don't want to. And it's a fun little battle of wills. But this is a really useful way of finding out a little bit about how our children and young people think about these topics. And some of our answers here reflected, this is kind of, we know this. This is the world that our children and young people are growing up in today. This view of science and religion being in conflict and very diverse ideas and maybe directly opposing each other. So we're all very kind of aware of that world, if you like. But we're also, hopefully because you're here, aware of this world, because this is the world that today's children and young people are growing up in. There is so much discussion going on about how science and religion work together. Positive discussion, like we're having here, not just the Faraday Institute, there have been groups talking about this, particularly over the last 20 or 30 years. This has really seen a big revival in terms of this discussion, and there are endless books and conferences and discussions going on about this, many of which I'm sure you're aware of. So given that, what do young people really think? This is where we have to bring in some research. We have a colleague called Berry Billingsley, who began her work here at Faraday back in 2006. She does a lot of research into looking at how children and young people think about science and religion in schools. She's now based at Canterbury Christ Church University, and she runs a centre called the Lazar Project, learning about science and religion, spelling out Lazar very happily. And she has done with a team a number of pieces of research exploring and looking at what children, young people in schools actually think about these topics. So you can find lots of these. If you just look up her name or her team's name, you can find lots of this research that's been going on over the last few years. And essentially, a lot of what that tells us is this kind of picture. That when asked something like, well, the scientific view is that God does not exist. Do you agree or disagree with that? This is sort of the picture that we get from young people in school. So these were aged 15 to 18, so a slightly sort of older age of school. A lot of them of this opinion that science says God doesn't exist. And the more of these topics that you put in front of them, the more of these questions that you ask them, we get this picture that science and religion are very distinct, often very opposed, very different things. We can look at that a little bit more detail if we find out actually what they're saying to us. So some of these comments have come from that research work as well. Students saying things like, science and religion are at war, they disagree, and it's making me feel uncomfortable with my religion. I want to believe in God, but science is making new answers. I don't know what to believe, I think is reflective of how a lot of people feel. And I grew up as a Christian, but science is changing all of it now. So this idea of conflict between the two, of that making people uncomfortable, you can see a lot of this is kind of, I'm not sure what to think. I want to feel one way or another, but I feel like something else is stopping that. But they do have questions. It's really, really easy to find out their questions. So we go into schools and we do all kinds of things. We'll tell you more about this. And the questions that come out from these children and young people from the age sort of 3 up to 18, whole age range, and they're asking questions like this. What was before the Big Bang? Does evolution take away the need for God? These questions that could be exactly the same questions you would get from a group of adults of any age, coming up from children as young as 3, 4, 5, when they start to explore these topics of science and religion and how these interact. When you give them an opportunity to ask questions, they have them. They want to know. So why is it, if we're in this world where, yes, a lot of things say there's conflict, but a lot of things say there isn't conflict, and children and young people have all of these questions, why is it that so many of them still think there's a conflict? Why is it that the prevailing view amongst our children and young people is that these two things are in conflict and that they have to kind of choose one or the other? Have we got any thoughts in the room? Why do we think that might be? Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So a couple of ideas in there. One, that the influence of the media is very strong, certainly for all ages, and that comes through a number of different routes, and the media like a good story. So we're all aware of that kind of influence. And then also this idea that maybe the kind of thinking you need to meld science and religion together is too complicated for younger people. Any other thoughts, ideas why? Yes. Yeah. So there's a lack of influence kind of showing this positive interaction between the two, certainly. And in media, again, that's a big problem. Any other thoughts? There was a, yeah.
Sorry, so that people think that science is about fact.
Yeah.
And it has answers and it proves things right.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it's very difficult to, if that's how you view science, it's very difficult to fit faith in with it.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, as we've heard a little bit today in some of the other talks, that very strong view that science gives us absolute truth, absolute answers, absolute fact. A lot of the response that we get from young people is along those lines of, well, science is fact and religion is faith, and faith is believing stuff without evidence, and science is believing stuff because evidence says it and therefore it's true. And it's a very kind of, if you like, a very shallow understanding of what those different areas are. I know you've explored that a bit today already. We have one more? Yes.
Sorry to just stress the media thing, but
No.
add to that social media too.
Yes.
I think a lot of what comes over from the church, and I'm saying the church rather than Christians,
Mm-hmm.
is that it's negative, that it's about saying no to things, that they're against things, and they abuse children, right? Whereas science, it's all about progress. It's all about new, exciting things.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about new cures. It's all about progress, as it were, kind of thing. And that's the dichotomy. And of course, it's science that gave the kids their social media platform and their iPads and their iPhones and stuff.
Yes, yeah. So we've touched on a lot. I'm sure there's more to explore in that, and you'll have more chance to discuss all of these topics later. There's a couple of things that I'd like to pull out at this stage as to why children and young people still think there's this conflict and what are the strong influences there. And one of those, now please bear with me and try not to be offended at this point. One of the reasons that children and young people often think there's a conflict is this is a picture of one of our Faraday courses from a few years ago. This is not entirely representative of our audience, but if we look around us today, we notice that we're all adults in here, by at least one definition of that term. Most of the discussion, in fact, almost all of the discussion that's gone on and is going on about science and religion happens amongst adults, for adults, gets turned into books for adults, read by adults, which is wonderful. You know, because if we're trying to change an understanding and a culture of how our world views science and religion, then talking to the adults that fill that world about it is a good thing to do. But it's not the only thing to be doing, because if we're trying to change a culture, then we need to be talking to people while they're young, while they're forming their ideas, before all of those ideas that we talk to adults about and have all those discussions with, before all of those are formed. So actually part of the reason that children and young people haven't necessarily all picked up this idea that science and religion can work together very nicely is because all the material that's being produced about that is aimed way above them. Another very strong impact on this is the way that we teach. So some of us picked up on this a little bit, and this idea of what science is and how it works comes into this, but you'll all recognise this idea that when we teach, particularly at secondary school, so above the age of 11, we have science down here, and then on another day we have RE, or we have geography, or we have history, and all of these subjects get taught very separately in their own little boxes, in their own classrooms by a different teacher, and our children, our young people, learn to box off these subjects in their heads. So they're very different, they have completely different approaches, and they're so rarely given any opportunity to explore the interaction between the two. So that example I used earlier talking about, well, science is fact and uses evidence and faith is a completely different thing. Talking to young people, they use the word evidence in a science classroom, in a history classroom, in an English classroom, in an RE classroom, and it means very different things, but they're very rarely given an opportunity to think about that. So actually the way that we teach creates these walls between subjects. And so there's a lot of work going on to explore that and think about how we can do that better, how we can use cross-curricular work and workshops and subjects to help young people to explore the interactions, not just between science and religion, but between all of their topics, to give a much more rounded worldview in the way that we think about this. I have a few quotes as well that sum up some of these main reasons why young people perhaps don't pick up this positive interaction that we'd really like them to so easily. The first of these is a comment from a teacher saying, well, not for all students, but on average, their view is that RE is not worth it. It won't give you answers, whereas they think science is the way forward. So this is just summing up that idea, really, that we present science, and this comes through the way we teach, it comes through the media, it comes through a lot of inputs that we have, that we present science as this ultimate way of knowing. If you really want to know something, you ask a scientist. Science gives us truth, it gives us fact, and then we present religious education or RE or ideas about faith as this very different depiction of, well, lots of different people think different things, and that has to be okay, and let's not ask too many questions about it because we'll offend somebody, and let's, just keep that at arm's length, really. So this comes directly from a teacher about what they think their students think. Another piece says, well, if I'm honest, this is from a teacher again, I'm not sure I could tell the difference at the moment between saying intelligent design and creationism. I can't answer many scientific questions because I haven't got the expertise, but if I could, I would do. So this highlights a really important point that actually a lot of teachers, and into this comes parents and church workers, church children's workers, youth leaders, people interacting with children and young people who might ask them their questions, they don't feel equipped to talk about these things. They don't have the resources that they need. They don't have the information or the background knowledge to answer these questions. I think for some, so that question, if we didn't hear it, was, is it a question of being equipped or whether or not they want to engage with those questions? For many people, I think those go together. Some people just don't want to engage with it, and that's a different question. But there are a lot of teachers and church children's workers and people out there who would very readily engage with these questions. They want to help the children and young people in their care explore them, but they just don't feel able to. Science and religion is on the syllabus for a lot of religious education courses, and in some other areas as well. And many of the teachers that we know and we encounter just don't really know how to teach it. They don't feel they're well enough equipped for it. And that actually leads on to this third point, which comes from a student saying, well, we don't ask science teachers questions anymore at the moment, they meant about religion, because we don't think they'd answer them. We'd have thought, oh, well, they won't answer it because it's not on their topic. So students and young people pick up very, very quickly, or we don't ask our science teacher questions about God, and we don't ask our RE teacher questions about science, or we don't ask our vicar questions about science, because they don't want to answer them. They see when we get uncomfortable. So, somebody asks a science teacher, oh, but do you think God did it? They immediately get uncomfortable because they don't know what to say. They may have a personal view, they may have thought about it, but they don't know how to put that across. They haven't thought about that, or maybe they've just never really thought about it. And so a lot of us, in a very well-meaning way, go, oh, I don't really know about that stuff, ask somebody else, thinking, oh, that will communicate, I'm not the one to answer this question, but you can find it out somewhere else. Whereas actually what that communicates a lot of the time is we don't ask those sorts of questions here. It's definitely a contributing factor for teachers, particularly talking about faith. A lot of teachers are very nervous talking about faith in general or about their personal faith if they have one, because it can be a tricky area to work out, well, what can we say and what can't we say, and will parents or people come back to this? So it can be done. There is freedom in UK schools to talk about faith, but again, it takes some thought. It takes some information, often some support, just to help teachers and help people think through how they can explore that. The other option there, and perhaps an easier option, is if teachers know of people and places they can go, they can point students to talk and think about these issues. Even if their answer then is, well, I don't know, or I've got my ideas, but let's explore that together. And we'll be telling you a little bit more about some of what we do, which does present an option for teachers to go, well, I don't feel comfortable discussing this myself, but let's get the Faraday team in. So there are options there. It is a tricky area for many teachers, but it is possible again. And the more confident that teachers and people feel that they know a bit about this area, the more confident they often feel to discuss it a bit. The final thing I want to say on this before I hand over to Steph to give a slightly more positive view to this negative vibe that I've drawn us all into, is just to finish up here, thinking, well, does this really matter? And I know we've touched on this already, we've kind of talked about this. It really does matter. We brought up a little bit earlier that idea of, well, maybe these are just too complicated, these ideas for children and young people, but they're really not, actually. This is what we see from some of those questions and from the responses we have from children, really young children, as young as 3 and 4. They can take hold of those ideas of science and religion working together. You start talking to them about it, and you say, well, what do you think? And they're like, well, maybe God made the Big Bang happen. It's not a difficult concept. And all these other ideas, I had a conversation with some 8-year-olds the other day. We were discussing the space-time kind of link, the space-time continuum, and what that means about the size of the universe and who made God and all of that. And so we talked about this a bit. And then one of them goes, so maybe is that something to do with how God can see everything that has happened and is going to happen and is happening all at the same time? Because he's outside of time, because he made time in the same way he made space. This is an 8-year-old. These topics are not too difficult for children and young people. They just need the opportunity to think and explore in a way that engages them and gives them space. And if they don't have that, then the picture they get at the moment is this. I choose science or I choose faith. And if we end up in that situation, we have young people with a faith who want to hold on to their faith, thinking, well, I have to ignore science. And they avoid studying it. They avoid going into scientific careers, which means that our society now and in the future, the people who are making decisions about what science does, what healthcare does, what artificial intelligence does, where we go in our world of technology and science, there are young people of faith who are deliberately avoiding going into those careers. And the other way, a lot of young people think, well, this science stuff's really robust, and my church aren't talking to me about how this stuff works, so science clearly makes more sense. Head off in that direction and decide that they can't pursue faith and avoid looking at it in later life again because they think, well, these two are opposed. And a lot of this data shows us that actually that decision isn't necessarily made at 18 or 25, that choice and that impression that science and religion are opposed comes in by the time they leave primary school. So by 8, 9, 10 years old, children have decided science and faith are opposed, I have to pick one or the other. I'm only going to listen to one of these things. So that's why it's important. That was the kind of negative vibe. We're going to spice things up a little bit now. Steph's going to come and tell you a little bit more of the positive around this of what's being done.
So talking about science and faith does matter. And I'm going to share a little bit about what the Faraday Institute in particular has been getting up to recently. But before that, I want to point out that there are a number of other groups doing some really great work in this area as well. So, for example, we've got Sing of God and Science, which is a really great project, actually working, getting young people in primary schools and their teachers thinking and writing some songs about God, but bringing in what we know now about science and therefore what we know about the wonders of God's world. So really trying to build in some of the awe and wonder of science into songs that are pointing to God and praising God. There was recently a chance for some of the young people who've been writing these songs to sing them at Ely Cathedral as part of Ely's Science Festival, which is brilliant. And there are some videos available on YouTube. If you want to know any more about that, actually, go and ask Trevor, who's hiding at the back in purple there, because he's been really instrumental and important for the work of that project. There's also Messy Church has recently produced a great resource. I'll wave it. Messy Church Does Science, which is really about affirming science and affirming young people who are interested in science and making it clear that the church that these young people have come to is interested in science, is positive about science. So again, creating an opportunity for young people to start asking questions or at least feel like their church is positive towards science. There's the LASAR project, which Lizzie mentioned. So Berry Billingsley is working in researching about how we learn and thinking about how we can get across to young people the kind of big questions about, well, what is truth and how do we know what we know? And so she does a lot of focus on teacher training and figuring out how we can better equip teachers, and also how we might be able to change the curriculum in the future to allow more space for exploration of these cross-curricular kinds of ideas. And then there's two similar things, God and the Big Bang, which Ruth mentioned I used to work for. I was coordinating that project, which is run by the Diocese of Manchester, and at the time was looking into, well, going into schools with a team of people who were scientists and Christian, and exploring with young people around the ages of 14 to 18 and giving them a chance for a full day of exploring science, exploring faith, and being able to ask their questions about it. And then there's us at the Faraday Institute, and we have a lot of close links with these other groups, but I'll share a bit more about what we do. So we go into schools. We think that working with young people is important, but I feel like a lot of what I'm saying here, a lot of our approach that we'll talk about later, this also applies to youth groups and engaging young people across the board, not necessarily just in schools. But why do we bother with schools? Well, put simply, students spend a lot of time in schools over their time, over 7,000 hours in school. So you might as well start engaging with them. You've got a fairly captive audience for a while, and you might as well do something interesting and exciting that they actually have questions about. We also find that students come to school and, you know, they might be a bit grudging about that, but actually they're prepared to learn. They're expecting to encounter new ideas and to think about things. And so it's a really great opportunity to start building in some new ideas if people who want to talk about science and faith can come in and have that space and time with them during a school day. Well, the Faraday Institute has been working on engaging young people for over 4 years now, around 4 years anyway. We've done 350 sessions plus with young people from the ages of 3 to 18, and that's over 13,000 students that have been reached over these 4 years on a whole range of different science and faith related topics. The feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, which is always encouraging. That's been from students saying things like, I now understand how science and religion are compatible, or even just saying, I wish we had that every day, which is great. It definitely makes me want to come back and carry on with my job, so that's nice. And some of those sessions look kind of unique and special, things happening on a larger scale in some cathedrals, such as getting involved with, say, Ely's Science Festival, and other cathedral events around the country. Also involves taking advantage of some of the guest speakers that come and talk to adults here at the Faraday Institute and thinking, well, you know, we've already pointed out that young people have these questions as well. They're capable of engaging with these things. So can we create a special event for young people to come along to, or maybe take one of those guest speakers into a school? So, for example, in the summer, we have our Faraday Summer Course, and Jennifer Wiseman, who is the director of the Hubble Space Telescope at NASA, she came along to the course, and she's incredibly busy, but she's also incredibly generous with her time, and she was really keen to do some schools engagement while she was here. So that was brilliant. She came into a school with us, and the kids had an amazing time. So lots of special kind of one-off events like that we do that get some great feedback, again, from students and also from teachers. So we must be doing something right. But we also primarily focus on our schools visits. This is what Lizzie and I spend a lot of our time doing. So we'll go into schools all over the country. There are a lot of great schools in this area, but if a school is willing to cover some travel expenses for us, then we'll go anywhere, and we love to travel, and we love to spread these ideas beyond the walls of the Faraday. So we take all sorts of different questions, all sorts of different topics in science, from things like fossils and evolutionary biology through to conservation science and creation care, and some bigger kinds of questions, again, about, well, what is science and what is religion and what is truth, and how do we find out more about this world that we live in? And we take those questions and we turn them into really interesting, interactive, hands-on sessions for young people in schools to engage with. And again, the feedback that we get is really encouraging. People saying that their students have really benefited from this sort of day, from the speakers that they've been able to build up a relationship with, the passion, the energy, the ability to raise thought-provoking questions in a way that young people are able to actually access and engage with. So a lot of great feedback, which is very encouraging. Lizzie's going to share a little bit more about some of the activities that we get up to.
So we thought we'd tell you just a little bit more about actually how we do, what we directly do when we go into a school. So these are just a few of the topics, again, highlighted that you've just seen Steph talking about. One of the advantages of the kind of work we do is that we can be really flexible. So we have a few sort of typical topics and questions that come up a lot, but if a school wants us to look at a particular topic or tailor something to a particular age group, or run a whole day or a 10-minute assembly, we can do that, and we can be very flexible, and we can give any kind of opportunity for young people to explore these questions. So a whole range of topics we get to explore, which is excellent fun, and we're helped by the fact that it's not really that difficult to be more of an expert in a topic than an 8-year-old. So there have been occasions where we've quickly become experts in something like stem cells overnight, where we've got the basic grounding, but on that basis, we don't claim to have all of the scientific background in all of these areas. Where we can, and where it will help the school particularly, we like to get people in who have expertise in a certain area. So we have a number of contacts who have expertise in, say, astrophysics or quantum physics or something where we really don't claim to be experts. But a lot of the time, what we're doing is really just opening up the questions. So we can give them enough information about a topic that we can answer a few questions about that, but then that can lead on to further questions, as you'll see. So we always start with a little bit of science. This is partly to get across the message that science is fun. This is also a very important message to be getting across to our young people in schools. It's also a really good way of opening up these questions because, as we've said, for many children and young people, they trust science. Science is established and valid in their minds. They're often a little bit suspicious of the faith angle. So if we can go in and establish ourselves as trustworthy scientists, it's a really good place to start. It also means you can start with a few experiments and demonstrations, which is an excellent way to try and get people on side, however old they are. So we're going to do a little bit of that now. You can see a few of the examples of things that we use up here. We've got some more of our demos over on the table there at the back. If you haven't come to see us yet, please do. But we thought we'd start with a little bit of science right now. So I'm going to do a bit of science, if that's okay with everybody. And in order to do this, I need some cash. Now, this is the moment at which I start to sound a bit like a con artist or a magician. If anybody's got any cash on them, it needs to be paper cash. We've got that's not going to do for me, I'm afraid. This plastic stuff's no good. Ruth's got a Scottish 20. Have we got any advance on that? English 20s, ideal, thank you. Thank you, just one will do. I have no problem with the Scots, but so, audience participation time. What is this? What can you tell me about it? Everybody gets very nervous. Come on, you all had your hands up earlier. We can do this. I know they work. Yes. It's a pound note. It's a £20 note. Very good. What else do we know about it? It's not made of paper. Why would you say that? Okay, so it's a kind of papery, linen-y mix, isn't it? So we're clever already. We know lots of things about this. What else can you tell me about it? What do we know about? If it's made of paper, it burns. It burns. Now that is a very interesting observation. I check this was your money, wasn't it? Yeah. Do you trust me? Your name is Stephen. You're not sure. Okay, we're gonna keep coming back to that. Okay. So this will work. I've got a spare if it doesn't. Okay. So this is mostly made of paper, right? And paper burns. Now when we do science, it's all about asking questions. So we start with a question, for example, what will happen if I set fire to this money? We bring in some background knowledge, like, well, it's mostly made of paper. Paper tends to burn when you set fire to it, so we come up with a hypothesis. We expect that if we set fire to this money, it will burn. And then we test it. Okay? We experiment, and that's a really key part of science. This is one of the reasons we do these demonstrations, is to really explore what science is and what it does. So we could test this. We could set fire, as the tension builds, to this money. Do you trust me? And see what happens. But science is also about pushing further. If we were to do this, we're pretty certain that this money would burn up. That would be corroborating what we think we know. But we can do a little bit more. We're fairly sure. In fact, I think we're sure enough that this would burn that we can complicate this a little bit. We can take it a bit further. We can think of, say, something that doesn't burn. Any ideas of something that doesn't burn? I'll give you a bit of a clue. Water! Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much for that inspired suggestion there. So what happens, new question, if we take something that we know burns, mix it with something that doesn't burn, and set fire to it? Any thoughts? What might happen? It won't burn? Who thinks it won't burn? Let's get some hands up. Who thinks it will burn? Who thinks I'm not going to set fire to it? Who really hopes I'm not going to set fire to it? Okay. I don't know if we can get these lights down or if that will mess with the camera, but you'll have to watch carefully. Okay. So, oh, wonderful. Something we know burns. Something we know doesn't burn. Bit of tension.
It burns.
Okay. So, thank you very much. We can pop those lights back on. So what just happened? I heard a few whispers going out. Magic! Magic happened. I love that moment because for about half a second, I'm a magician and it's brilliant. And then they start to get wise. So what happened other than magic? Any thoughts? It wasn't water. Excellent. So what you've done there is we did the experiment. You analysed the results of the experiment and you thought, that wasn't what I was expecting to happen. Something's going on. So we look back at our methods, we look back at the questions and the background knowledge, tried to figure out what was going on there. And you have all very quickly and cleverly surmised, without even needing to sniff this piece of paper, that something was going on. Any thoughts as to what this might be?
Gin.
It's not gin, but that's not a bad guess. There is alcohol here, but if it was just alcohol and I set fire to the paper, what would have happened? Whole thing would have gone up, yeah. So in that sense, we have to have something else going on. And what this actually is a 50-50 mixture of water and alcohol. So some of you will have been wise to that, so thank you for not ratting me out just yet. But what we get when we mix the water and alcohol is the alcohol burns off, gives us that lovely big flame, and the water keeps the paper damp enough that it doesn't burn up. So if we were to fully observe this, we'd see it's not burnt, it's a little bit damp, and it smells a bit. But it will be fine. Thank you very much for offering that up. So that example, and oh, thank you. That example and others like it are a really good, very quick, fun, attention-grabbing way to demonstrate what science is and what it does. So from that, you can very easily explore science is really good at asking and exploring questions like, what happens if we set fire to this, if we sit on that, if we poke that? How big is that? How far away is that? How old is that? You can introduce very easily the idea that science is about measurable, testable types of questions, that there's a very specific type of question we explore with science. And you can look at the power of those kinds of questions. Some of the things that science has helped us to discover. Quite often what we do in our work and some of the other projects you heard about, we have people in from different scientific backgrounds and disciplines, and it doesn't really matter what you talk about as long as you're enthusiastic about it, and you can demonstrate the power of what science can do, the kinds of things it can tell us. But from that place of thinking about what science does do, we very easily move on to thinking about, well, is there anything it doesn't do? Thinking about if the power of science comes from the type of questions it looks at, there must be other kinds of questions that science doesn't explore. So there's a very famous example up there in that corner that I'm sure many of you know, you may even have seen it today, of a boiling kettle. If we ask, why is the kettle boiling? We can answer that by saying, well, there's an input of energy and there's maybe fire or electricity and it's heating the water to about 100 degrees and we get a state change and all of that stuff. Or we can say, well, the kettle's boiling because I want a cup of tea. And those are two very different, potentially contradictory answers. But actually, it's very normal to us to take both of those together. And we can see if we look at that picture that actually taking the science, the mechanism, answering the how of the kettle boiling, alongside that idea that I want a cup of tea, which is really exploring the meaning or the purpose in the whole thing, taking those two together gives us a bigger and a better picture of what's really going on. We don't try and just choose one or the other. Nobody tries to say, no, I don't believe you about all that electricity rubbish. The only reason I will accept is that I want a cup of tea, or the other way around. We very easily recognize, well, there's mechanism there, there's meaning. The kettle's boiling because I want a cup of tea, and what's happening is described by the science. So from that kind of place and that kind of example, we can begin to explore all of these types of questions that might be involved in figuring out our universe. Thinking about the place of science, the kind of power that science has, but then all these other questions about meaning and purpose, which might interlink with that to help give us a bigger picture. So all of these things come in, and we work through then from thinking about science to the kinds of things it does, to the kind of things it doesn't, and how these different things can interrelate as people are trying to build up a picture of the world. And there from then, we often get on to much more questions. Many, many more questions come out about all kinds of different topics. Sometimes these are the focus, so we might look immediately at this question of how about evil and suffering? If there's a God, why would that God create in a way that includes suffering, and all of those questions? But we don't even have to focus on those. Those questions always come up. If we're in front of a group of children or young people of any age, we start talking about science, we start talking about any of these topics, they inevitably get to questions about, yeah, but what is this faith thing to you? How does it make sense? And those questions come out about being a Christian, about having a faith as a scientist. Inevitably, we get questions like, is there any science that could be discovered that would make you doubt your faith? How does this suffering thing work? If God's so good, then why did my nan die? You know, and so many questions that come out. And these questions about creation and Genesis and all of these different things that have been bubbling away with nowhere to go, suddenly they get an opportunity to ask them and explore them. And we're not there to give them the answer, and we don't pretend to be. We're there to say, that's a great question. Here's some thoughts about it. Here is some thinking that I've done or that other people have done. What do you think? Keep exploring, keep looking, keep asking those questions. So we do a little bit more than just going into schools. As Steph has told you a little bit about some of that already, we do some training to help teachers and these are some early career scientists who we were training to think about their science and their faith and how they might talk about that to children and young people. So we've trained a number of people. These workshops in particular were a collaboration with the God and the Big Bang project, to training up lots of early career scientists in different fields to come along in God and the Big Bang workshops or in Faraday work or in their own situations to talk about science and faith to young people. We do some training for teachers as well. We're also part of this kind of research and development of resources that Ruth mentioned. This teaching resource was produced by the God and the Big Bang Project in collaboration with many of these young scientists and a number of others through our contacts. Produced a few years ago for young people in that age range, 14 to 18. So these resources are available for schools work. They are excellent. I encourage you to look them out if any of you have any schools contacts in that age group. We also, as Ruth mentioned, we're currently working on a program to develop some resources for 2 to 12-year-olds. Some of the points that were brought out earlier were this idea of, well, we think children and young people have this view of conflict between science and religion because there aren't materials or resources or influences giving them any other view. And that's kind of true at the moment. We did quite a big survey of what resources and materials are out there for children and young people exploring topics like creation and space and the world and all of those kind of topics. And it turns out there's really not very much at the moment giving them a positive view of the science-faith interaction. But we're working on it. We have about 15 different resources in production with 4 different publishers. So some for direct use in schools, some for direct use in churches, sort of holiday clubs, that kind of idea. Many of them for use at homes or in libraries for children of different ages. Some exploring, directly looking at those questions that we've been asked in schools. Some of them sort of science fiction adventures for them to read by themselves that present a world where science and religion interact in a normal way, and that's just the standard, that's the way that the book is set. Or for some of them, they're exploring that and looking at the kind of what-if questions. You know, what if we had a society where you just weren't allowed to ask why type questions, and the only questions that were allowed were the what and the how? How would that look? So some of these resources really trying to explore this and encourage that positive science-faith interaction. Along with that will come a dedicated website that hosts all of those resources and all the others that we can recommend and some of our own material that we create for work in schools and all of that kind of thing. So this website will be live shortly and will host a number of hopefully very useful materials for use in schools and in churches and at home and in many other situations. And hopefully that will, again, do slightly more to redress this balance so that there's more and more information out there for children and young people and those who work with them to explore and use these resources to think about these questions well. So Steph's going to come back, tell you a little bit of actually what impact this has. We've shown you a bit of the feedback already, but we have some data, which everybody loves, especially as we're in a scientific context.
Yeah, having talked about lots of what has been going on and what's been being done, it's always worth checking out whether any of this is having a useful impact at all. I'd like to think that it is. So this is from one of the studies that we talked about, LASER, and it's data that was collected by the God and the Big Bang Project, but I'm fairly confident in saying you can apply this, and having looked at feedback from events that we've done with the Faraday Institute, I'd say that this is a fairly typical pattern that we would see after going into a school. Yeah, sure. Yes. So this is a sample of 15 plus schools in the UK, all over the UK, so not just one area, and not just Church of England schools, but actually a mixture of secondary schools.
Could be very different, and this is no condemnation here at all, in a very different culture like Iran or China or...
Absolutely. And I think, you know, if we were doing work in another country, we'd have to think very carefully about the different culture and what kind of approach we would need. I think a lot of our approach has come from working in this country and gradually building up this works well, this doesn't work quite so well, through talking with the young people and their teachers and exploring that. So, yeah, a good point. So this was from a set of surveys where we got the students to select whether they strongly agreed, weren't really sure, disagreed, strongly disagreed, to a number of statements before the start of the day and then at the end of the day as well. So this first one, just to give you an example, is I believe science and religion can fit together. And at the start of the day, you've got a lot of uncertainty. You've got 42% of the young people don't really know, 31% agree, 27% disagree. And by the end of the day, you've moved them from that uncertainty, that I really don't know and maybe I disagree, to a place where 55% of the students think, yeah, I believe that science and religion can fit together, which is a brilliant outcome and incredible seeing the upper end of the teenage scale deciding that they can admit to changing their mind about something is great. Similarly, I'm interested in whether science and religion can fit together. They become more interested over the course of a day, so that's great. The scientific view is that God does not exist. 41% of students agree with that statement at the start of the day. By the end of the day, it's only 19% of students that think that science and the scientific view is that God does not exist. And you have 47% of students agreeing that actually maybe science doesn't have to prove or disprove the existence of God. Another similar one, you see these big changes going on throughout the day. The evolution question. Evolution is compatible with creation by God. By the end of a day, the students, 54% of them agree with the idea that, yeah, you can believe in evolution, you can be comfortable with that idea at the same time as being comfortable with the idea of a creator God, which is really interesting and really positive and actually quite a nuanced view for young people to hold, but is something that they have gotten to grips with. Science makes it hard to believe in God. I find this one really heartbreaking. As a person who became a Christian while studying science at university, I've got quite a strong opinion on it. And it's really sad that 55% of students at the start of a day would say, yeah, science does make it hard to believe in God. And it's a really encouraging turnaround by the end of the day. And feedback, it's always great to kind of come in and get some more useful explanations for why we've seen some of those changes in opinions, changes of ideas. And I think one of the things that we've learnt and drawn out of a lot of this feedback is that students really value the opportunity to have a question and answer session, that they really enjoy encountering people who aren't there to push any one particular viewpoint and aren't there to blag and pretend that they know all the answers to something, but are actually just there to share some of their thoughts and to start exploring and to get across the idea that, you know, we don't have to know the answers to things and we don't have to be afraid of asking these big questions, even if it turns out that no one knows the answer yet. Because actually, not knowing the answer is exciting. We can carry on investigating, we can carry on looking into those areas of mystery without being scared of the unknown, really. So there's a lot of really interesting feedback from students on this sort of thing, but the chance to explore and ask questions is something that they really appreciate. So just hand over to Lizzie again to wrap up.
Stay here, we're just finishing off. We thought it would be useful at the end of this. We've presented quite a lot about what we do in schools and the kind of thing that we do, and wanted to leave you with some thoughts about, well, actually, what is it that you can do? You know, you're not on our team. If you'd like to be, do talk to us. But there are a number of things that you can do in your various positions to help children and young people think about science and religion in their context. So the first thing you can do, I feel fairly comfortable saying this in this context, you can pray. This is an area that I believe God is very interested in and very invested in. So please do pray for us, pray for our work, pray for us to get continued funding to do this kind of stuff, and pray for the children, the young people that we see, that we get in touch with, and also for those in your congregations, the people, children, young people that you have contact with. Pray for them to have the opportunities to explore these questions and have the boldness to do that, and have people around them who help them to explore and discover these, so that they don't end up having to make that choice between science and faith. You can spread the word about what we do. We have information over there by our table, or you can get in touch with us very easily. Do tell people about what we're doing. If any of you know any teachers or are teachers or school governors or have any friends with children or anything, please do spread the word. The best way for us to get contacts in schools is for somebody who understands what we're trying to do and is passionate about it in that school, or with a contact with the school saying, you should do this, you should really do this. Because schools are busy places and teachers are busy. So please, if you have any contacts where you think this might be useful, please do spread the word. I put this in there just because, why not? You can donate. If any of you are sitting on a few £1,000s and you want to chuck a bit our way, please feel free. I'm sure there'll be more information about how you can support the work of the Faraday as we go on. I promise to try not to burn all of it. You can encourage your young people. I've talked about this a little bit already. You may not think of yourself as a children's worker or a youth leader or a parent or a grandparent, but I guarantee that all of you have influence over young people. Even if all you occasionally do is walk past some and say hi, you will have an influence on them. And the way that you and your congregation talk and think about science and religion and present these topics that come up will have an impact on the children and young people who you encounter and those who are encountered by the people in your congregation. So please think about that. Do everything that you can to make your impact in this way a positive one. You can take part in some training, so you all get points for that already because you're here. As we say, we have more specific training for people thinking about communicating directly with children and young people. So if you or anybody you know would like to be involved in that, please, again, drop us a line. You can run your own sessions. As we said, it's not massively difficult. It mostly involves being enthusiastic about science and being able to say, I don't know, let's find out. And knowing where to look as well. And hopefully we've presented a few of those resources. And you can tell your own story. Whether or not you have a specific scientific background, as I've said, you all have influence. And you'll have something to say about this area that will have an impact. So there's a few things there about what you can do. We would love for you to discuss this yourselves. We've got a little bit of time left for that. So we are going to get you into discussion groups and put a few questions up here for you in a moment. But if there are any burning questions for us before we do that, we can take those now. Yes.
I'm trying to think through how
There's a microphone just coming.
Sorry.
There you go.
I'm trying to think through how this works out in a situation where a high proportion of the students have a faith, but which isn't a Christian faith.
Which is often the case. In many of our schools, we have a very mixed audience, if you like. So there are children, young people there with Christian faith. There are a lot of Muslim students in many schools, particularly inner city schools. And lots of students who either will, deliberately say, I have no faith, I'm an atheist, I don't think there's a God, or who just don't know and haven't thought about it or don't want to think about it. So everything that we do is directed to try and get young people to think and question and explore. We're not going in to give an answer. We're not going in as any kind of evangelistic sort of program. We are both personally Christians, and so we will present that as a part of what we're doing. If they ask us questions about our faith, we will give the response that we have developed as Christians. But a lot of what we do is talking very sort of broadly about religion and how religious ideas fit with science. And then much more broadly as well, lots of questions will come up and we'll say, well, lots of people have different ideas. Even Christians have different ideas about these questions. This is my personal view. Here is another view. What do you think? So we're really not in there to give an answer or give an idea. Regardless of their faith background, whether they're of specific faith or none, children and young people are interested in these questions, and they're questions worth thinking about and asking for all of them. So.
And just to chip in a tiny bit quickly, I find that, this is on, that I've worked with Muslims in Church of England schools in particular, actually, and they'll say things like, oh, it's really great to have someone of faith coming in and talking about science. They're not going, oh, but you're a Christian, you don't believe what I believe. They're just really interested that someone is being positive about both of those things at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, any further questions? Yes? There's a microphone on its way.
I was thinking, we mentioned earlier about the sort of extremes of people who believe that everything in the Bible is true, but they at least accept that not everybody believes it. You can still go about your business. You have a right to be alive. But there are some religions where the very extreme ends of that means that you shouldn't really be cluttering up the face of the earth. And for children who are growing up in that kind of setting at home, it must be very unsettling for them to be presented with, well, it's okay to ask questions, it's okay to think outside the box. And I'm just wondering whether you've detected any need for follow-up support for people for youngsters whose minds have been, in their context, been totally shaken up, and who perhaps then feel that what their parents expect them to believe is being questioned and undermined as well. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. A number of things to say in response to that, really, and won't cover all of it now. People and children who grow up with a very strong viewpoint from parents or their community in one particular idea, they are going to encounter other ideas at some point in their life. They probably have done already, regardless of what age they are. So part of what I would say is I would hope that the kind of message that we're presenting is one that actually encourages, even if it shakes a little bit. So as well as saying, well, there are other ideas out there, which I'm sure they've already discovered, we're saying, that's okay. Let's explore it. It's all right to explore. You will get situations where, young people, in the same way as many adults do when they explore topics like this, where they go, well, previously, all of my ideas about my faith were predicated on this point of what I thought about the science-faith sort of interaction, and now I think that's shaken, so I don't know what to do with my faith, which is that kind of crisis point that you're talking about. And in that situation, in a school, we always make it possible, if we can, for people to come and talk to us directly, if they'd like to. And also, we hope, and again, as far as we're able to arrange it, we say there is follow-up care and opportunity within the school system. We obviously can't be responsible for all of that. We try to be as gentle and encouraging as we can in our work, and we always try and encourage schools to follow up in any case, whether it's in that situation or just to keep going with this kind of work and keep encouraging young people to question and to think about these things. Any other questions? Loads of questions. Brilliant. We've just moved across here.
Just following up a previous point I made. I think what you're doing is absolutely brilliant. I used to teach RE, and I work in this area, and I think it's brilliant what you're doing. Just really emphasising my West point. One thinks could be difficult in the southern states. If the Faraday Institute ever tried to be missionary, I don't know if they ever thought of going overseas, but obviously blood has been spilt realistically in the southern states. You think of the monkey trials and things like that, and hopefully but there are parts of the world. Even a civilized society was once the United States before Trump came along. You really this which we take for granted. Praise the Lord. I have to, and you want to go with you and expand all this. We just have to recognise it's still perhaps be a bit transient in some areas. Full stop.
Well, I think one of the things that I find important when I'm encountering viewpoints that are held very strongly. There's a lot of emotion involved in that. And I think if it's a Christian viewpoint, then the way that we would like to approach it is to affirm, well, what is it that we all agree on? What is that common ground? We agree the same thing. We think that God is incredible, that he is big enough and powerful enough to create the world in whatever way he chooses. And we don't want to get in the way of people's viewpoints on how he did that. But we don't need to be hugely worried about it. We don't want to limit God in some way. We also agree on who Jesus is and what he's done and what the purpose of humanity's existence is up to an extent. And so there's a lot about trying to find the positive in those conversations that I think is really important. And I think it's really important for young people in schools to see people disagreeing well in some ways. So drawing out what do we agree on? Great, okay, that's taken some of the threat out of this conversation. Okay, so now that we've figured out what our common ground is this now, can this become something that's just an interesting conversation, an exciting thing to explore that isn't a threat to someone's faith? So it's hard work.
Yes, yeah, it is. And also just to point out, as Faraday, we work in a number of different countries and contexts. The school's work has been mostly UK-based, but we're branching out a little, spoilers. But also there is some excellent work already going on in the States. You'll have heard of the Biologos organisation and a few others doing biologos.org. Take a look. So they and others have some excellent work going on, particularly dealing with some of those really heated areas in that culture, in their particular cultural context.